What you see is Trump and Besant kind of dead faced looking at the camera when people are asking, well, hey, do you see the stock market down however many percentage points it is, and all of the negative news out there, and they're just looking at the camera and say, yeah, we're going to go through some of that, and that's sort of by design.
And so it's been fascinating to look in places like New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, where inventories today are actually lower than they were in 2017.
Episode 35 of Market Moves with Mark and Jeff. Jeff, 35 episodes in. It's kind of hard to believe.
I was just thinking that, Mark. It's we haven't given up. So if nothing else, we were persisting, regardless of the value being driven. But fun to be continuing to do this as I talk with people about the podcast. They ask how it's going. We've gotten some positive feedback from some. It really kind of forces us to get better at understanding what's going on in the world around us. And so I find value in it for that, if nothing else.
You bet. And we're almost up to 300 subscribers, Jeff. Hopefully we'll get there. It's been a very slow trickle, but yeah, there is a lot of we get a lot out of doing this. So really enjoy doing it, whether we have a ton of listeners or not. But really grateful to the folks that send comments in saying that they enjoy it. We really appreciate that. Jeff, I'm glad we're recording today. I am, as opposed to yesterday, because I'm just breaking a 3-day fast. Something you and I do, maybe not together at this point, but kind of do off and on. And this one was a little bit harder than normal, but man, do I enjoy the benefits that come from it.
Yeah, it's interesting. And you'd called me early in on this one saying, man, this is different and harder than usual. Have you gone through this before? And I've honestly kind of gotten to the point where my wife doesn't like hearing about when I'm going through it. So I just don't tell her, just don't say anything, and just do it, periodically. And there's something about just doing something challenging like that really does have some, some positive benefits. I had a couple of siblings in town recently, and we went and did the cold plunge and sauna at this place. I hadn't really done a cold plunge before, and it was much shorter duration, but same kind of concept. You're sitting there freezing to death, like it hurts, and you're just telling yourself, well, I'm going to keep doing this for however long I've set it for. And you'd think it wouldn't be that hard to just sit there and not eat, but when you haven't eaten for a day or two, you start to feel it. But after the fact, you really are glad that you went through the experience.
Yeah, there is absolutely like a discipline component to it that makes you appreciate the process. It's hard to do. I think there's like a heightened sense that you have, smell, hearing, taste, and even thinking through things. You just have a much clearer mind when you're going through this. And I really appreciate just kind of taking a step back and being aware of the habit, the like eating habits that I've sort of slipped into. My goodness, that's what requires so much discipline, is just a habit every hour to drink or eat something or whatever.
Boy, absolutely. And it's interesting, that I hear people talk about doing this in different settings. One of the podcasts I really like, and I think you listen a lot to as well, is Lex Friedman. He just interviewed Prime Minister Modi from India, and he had talked about doing extended fasts, just only eating a particular fruit for I think he said 9 days. I don't know how often he does that. Some of it's kind of in conjunction with some of the country holiday or celebrations and stuff, but really interesting. But even like in Sherlock Holmes books, it's funny, but like the character Sherlock Holmes will go for extended periods of time eating very little, and talks about like the heightened mental kind of acuity that comes with that. And it's just lots of different allusions to, kind of some of these benefits that come from it, in spite of the short-term pain of not just being able to eat whenever you feel like it.
Well, whether you're religious or not, I think it is a kind of a spiritual experience, no matter how you go through it. And, I think that the last piece that I end up doing this for is that concept of like autophagy, where the weaker cells are the ones to die first. And if you don't feed them, those are the ones to go. So it's kind of a full body cleansing process. So anyway, I just got through that. Thought we'd talk about it for a second here. We have now done that and checked that box. I also follow Brian Johnson's kind of country or world stirring content that he puts out. He is like doing all sorts of things, just kind of using his body as an experiment, I guess. But one post that caught my eye, Jeff, was the one treatment that he's been doing regularly that he's found the biggest, deepest impact is this hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which is kind of sitting in a chamber, having high oxygen and high pressure, kind of pushing and forcing the oxygen into the cells. So I may have to try that. Maybe I'll come back on here and let everybody know I'm thinking about that one.
If you don't faint or pass out during this episode, then we'll green light you to go do the next experiment. I have heard of some doing that though, specifically, and it's kind of same thing. It's pretty impactful. Haven't done it personally, but same thing. Interested in trying it.
There is so much. My wife just got done with some full body analysis thing that they're recommending to do every month. And I mean, if we monitor our businesses every month and our personal finances every month, there's all these metrics that we can track on ourselves. We should. I feel like I should be doing that and kind of databasing it and watching, what changes are happening and get out of front of anything.
It's interesting. I mean, it really is to have insight into how you're performing, personally and individually, in addition to, your business and other, family and other metrics, that you just kind of naturally, take for granted or tend to monitor more intentionally. Of course, people may hope that that this component of discipline is imposed into the conversations that we have. Sometimes we kind of meander around. People are probably wondering, if this even is the Market Moves podcast at this point. But it truly is fun to talk about some of the kind of personal things that you learn and experiment and try over time, for sure.
Real estate nerds talking about health. What could be more engaging? Well, on that note, Jeff. America's richest 1% could buy nearly the entire housing market. Tell me a little bit about this headline.
Boy, it's such an interesting one that caught my eye. And I wondered initially if it was even worth discussing or bringing up. But so there was this article that was written, and it just gave a little bit of perspective that I hadn't fully appreciated. But the top 1% as defined by, I think, the Fed, just looking over my notes here, is reported to have a net holdings or a net worth of $49.2 trillion. So to be in the top 1%, basically you would have $11.2 million in net worth, 1.3 million households in the United States, fit that top 1%. I looked up to see if that jived and made sense, and statistics show that 131.4 million households total in the United States. So it lined right up, fit this top 1%, 11.2 million in net worth. And so what was done in this article was they had taken all of the aggregated value in residential real estate in the United States. And this is according to Redfin. So, I mean, you take it what it's worth. You may not believe it on an individual property level, but in aggregate, it's at least some, approximation of what all of the residential real estate is worth in the country. That number, that total value, was estimated at $49.7 trillion of total value in residential real estate, compared to the $49.2 trillion in net worth of the top 1% of individuals in the U.S. And of course, the point being made is that not all of the top 1%'s wealth is held in real estate. In fact, you can make kind of an interesting point that only 12.3% of their total net worth is held in real estate. Much of that's in financial assets, in businesses, in other, probably less liquid type of investments. But it was an interesting point of reference that how much overall wealth and value is controlled relative to the amount of residential real estate in the country.
Well, Jeff, I think in large part we've got a couple of topics to discuss here. This headline here at the outset, along with kind of federal monetary policy, both with Jerome Powell speaking yesterday on his actions, but also Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is making kind of a publicity tour around sort of trying to discuss what policy is. And I think this headline is here. I think the national narrative matches this headline that the rich have gotten richer. It feels like it's hard to afford a home. It's hard to afford eggs and gas and go to Chick-fil-A for my family of five, right? And when you have increasing interest rates and you have increasing inflation, it's really hit the American public hard, and I think pushed those. If you've got assets, stock market has been booming during inflation. I think that's often what it does. But if you're the average person, you don't have these assets. You're not in the stock market. If you didn't own a home and you're trying to buy one now, interest rates have soared through the roof. So you didn't appreciate the stock appreciation. You didn't participate in the home price appreciation that we saw. And now interest rates are through the roof. And it's a really difficult circumstance for the average American.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's the interesting thing, that where this article ties into what the current administration and then those within it are focusing on is trying to address the affordability of, housing, of, just kind of daily necessities. Of course, there are, political aspects that will be debated, probably not here very much, which I'm perfectly comfortable with, but, we'll see how it plays out. But the stated intention is for an improvement in the plight or the situation of the kind of typical or everyday American, as opposed to those at the very top.
Yeah, and we have felt this, in the appraisal landscape, and I think a lot have, watching what's going to need to happen for things to get healthy again, and it's the unfortunate reality that it needs to get worse before it gets better. And if we don't take our medicine, maybe the medicine we didn't take after 2008, the medicine we haven't been taking after COVID, that we're not going to get to a healthy market. And a healthy market is pricing power or meaningful position in the marketplace for the average American.
I think that's exactly right. And so, it'll be interesting to see how these, policies and efforts actually get implemented and executed, and do they have the stated effect or not. I try not to be too cynical. I remember the Affordable Care Act that was passed, and all I know is that the net effect, to me and a company at the time, was the opposite of the stated impact. The Inflation Reduction Act, it was supposed to reduce inflation, and guess what? It turns out that inflation went the opposite direction. So, whether it's poor implementation, whether it's misnaming, whatever on those policies in the past, my hope is that the efforts that are being implemented now will have the stated, impact, or the desire for the impact. So we'll continue to watch it as it goes forward and see.
What you see is Trump and Bessent kind of dead-faced looking at the camera when people are asking, well, hey, do you see the stock market down however many percentage points it is, and all of the negative news out there, and they're just looking at the camera and say, yeah, we're going to go through some of that, and that's sort of by design. And we've talked about maybe some government spending or government-run led economy to a private company led economy, and there's a transition in that too. So these things are going on. It seems to be pretty intentional, but it's all in an effort to address the headline from this article, I think, Jeff, which is that the top 1% could own the U.S. housing market. That isn't probably a very good stat to be able to say is true.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the last thought I've got on that particular topic is it was interesting. They also broke down and showed that, I think, I'll get it real quick. So the bottom 50% of U.S. households have just over 46% of their net worth held in real estate, which at first glance might seem like a positive thing, but I think, those holdings are in primary houses that are really a cash drain, not necessarily a cash infusion by the time you're paying all the expenses to live in the home, not necessarily as second or third homes or investment properties or that sort of a thing. And so, the distribution of assets, is not evenly distributed, obviously. And I think, that there's at least the stated effort or the willingness to allow for there to be some pain in the stock market, as you had suggested, in implementing, these changes as they go forward.
Well, an interesting note is I've been listening to Bessent kind of make his tours around. I did not know this, that he was kind of like an analyst involved in the kind of infamous George Soros trades on the pound and against the UK banking system. Soros is well known for a variety of reasons, good or bad, I don't know. But I'm certainly aware of the enormous winning bet that he made back in. I had no idea that Besant was part of that. Stanley Druckenmiller, well-known successful investor, part of that too. So was kind of the middleman between Soros and Besant at the time. So interesting, a tangled web we weave.
Yeah, it really is. But I listened to that same podcast where that same interview with him, and just interesting to see some of the experiences they had. And it stood out to me that he had a very crystal clear recollection of dates and bets that they were making at the time in the the 1980s and 90s, and it was just interesting. I mean, a bright guy for sure, and hopefully he's able to be successful in implementing some of the policies that they're trying to anyway.
Well, I think we had a pretty unsurprising and unbreaking news Jerome Powell speech yesterday. I haven't listened to it in full, but I've read a summary or two. And obviously no interest rate moves. Interest rates are down a little bit, 6.71% is we're speaking right now here. So that's nice. Anything below 7 is something good, at least as the last 12 months are concerned. They did say that they are expecting 2 more rate cuts at some point this year, kind of still on schedule. That's not more or less than they have forecasted there. I've seen a lot of people were quite frustrated with the word transitory describing inflation at the beginning of inflation rising and during COVID. And it certainly did not turn out to be transitory. And they are now using that word again to describe tariff inflation, that they expect retaliatory tariffs, and they expect some inflation from that, but that to be transitory.
I thought it was pretty bold of him to even use the word again, as significant of inflation as we've dealt with for a while. So it surprised me a little bit, honestly, that he is describing it that way. But I mean, to be fair, if I was in his shoes, I would just zoom out on the time frame and say, yeah, it was transitory. It only took us 3 years to fix, or whatever the time frame was. But I think that it is an important acknowledgement, though, that the Trump tariffs are going to have an impact, and that's at least on the Fed's radar. As far as I don't think they really know what that impact is going to be, and so their statement is always, we're going to react to the data as it comes in, and until the tariffs are implemented and the actual impact is felt. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened and it did have some inflationary pressure and they decided to pause or wait on any rate cuts. But I think every time I hear him talk, it's leaving the door open to adjust to what the realities on the ground are, at whatever future date, happens to arrive to the present. And that is more of the same as far as what I heard with his most recent press statement.
Well, we are getting some stability from the Fed, and I think that can be helpful. That can give direction to borrowers and home sellers to make decisions, that are in front of them, whether to wait or not. And I think there's stability means that they can act based on what's happening around their lives. I think so good there. Good there. Switching gears, but staying kind of macro, we have Bill Pulte, director of FHFA, taking his seat some 5 days ago or something. I curious. I guess observable. I don't know if it's curious, but observable. He is very obviously carrying the same philosophy that we are hearing around, like, the political landscape and government efficiency, DEI and these sorts of things. He went around, I think he gave the press a tour of an FHFA building that has a $57 million a year rent. Turns out that 49 of 2,900 people are coming in to work. It says showing up to work full time. I don't really know how to interpret that. I'm sure some folks are coming in on several days a week or whatever. But certainly making the point that everybody needs to come back to work, and then how many employees are there when it's all said and done. I haven't heard of any layoffs he's talking about specifically since he's taken office, but also uttering the exact words that I think Scott Turner did at HUD, which was DEI is dead at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Yeah, interesting to see the consistency in the messaging through these different organizations there, as far as the perspective or approach, on efficiency and cleaning up waste. In a press article or a press interview that he did, he was talking about having found examples of kind of exorbitant severance packages and stuff that they were looking into. And I think just to focus on, we're not going to waste money or spend it irresponsibly. And whether that's having buildings we don't need or paying people in ways that that we shouldn't be, very consistent with, like you said, the HUD secretary's perspective as well on on the DEI. And one of the other things that was interesting, Mark, and I'm curious about your perspective or read on this, is you rightly pointed out he hasn't been officially in that role very long, but has made some pretty big moves in the moment. In fact, I had just looked up on the Fannie Mae side, 7 board members have been released or fired. 6 were remaining in place, and 3 new ones appointed. With Freddie Mac, there were 6 board members that were fired, and then replaced by just 2 incoming board members. And Pulte has appointed himself the chairman of each of those boards. Curious what you make about that, or those actions in pretty short order of him taking the official seat there.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways to interpret it. And all we're left to do right now, I think, is to kind of guess at why these moves were made one way or another. When I heard this, when I saw this, in like board turnover, I can see is not too abnormal, but making himself chair on both, I think my initial read was just, hey, if you're in conservatorship, you're going to be dealing directly with me, and we're making decisions together on this. Probably happening that way anyway, but the assuming the chairman role maybe makes that more obvious, and kind of purposely makes a point, possibly one way or another. So I looked at it that way, but Jeff, I think there are others that look at it that it might signal something else. What do you see there?
Yeah, so this article that I was reading, it was at least suggested that perhaps this is a signal, and there's been no official communication to this effect. So, I mean, it's just people trying to read the tea leaves in the moment. But that, is he trying to set the stage to combine both companies and reduce what might be perceived as redundancy in the services that they provide? And it was interesting to hear that point made. I mean, the actions are what they are in the moment. I don't know of any official effort to do that. Honestly, I'd be a little surprised if that did happen, but given the actions, it's a possibility. The thing that stood out to me was the contrast between Mark Calabria's perspective on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac as being 2, major players in the market. But in our conversation with him, he was suggesting that, hey, maybe 5 or 6 would be a more appropriate number of chartered organizations that, that had the stated purpose of ensuring liquidity in the mortgage market so that real estate transactions can take place and not be as interrupted as they were in the great financial crisis of 2008, when Fannie and Freddie both get into distress and there aren't really additional players in that market. Having it a little more diversified and spread out, and not a single company so impactful or critical to the liquidity in the mortgage market that if they have a problem, the whole market has a problem. That, with my limited understanding, that perspective from Calabria made more sense to me than a further consolidation of 2 into 1, a Fannie and Freddie. So I don't honestly know where things are going. It seems that from a safety and soundness perspective, we'd be better off with more, and maybe not as large of companies filling this role in space, which is an important one. But maybe there's a desire to go in the opposite direction, and maybe it's made by people smarter than me. I don't know.
Jeff, my last point on this topic, and some things that I have heard listening around, I think Besant even has suggested that possibly Fannie and Freddie somehow wind up in the U.S. sovereign wealth fund concept that's being floated around one way or another. And, what would that look like? I don't know. I don't know if it feels like multiple entities, and as Calabria is suggesting, more than the two that we have. Competition is always good. Well, most of the time good. It seems like these two get hyper competitive in certain times. But competition is generally really good. And could you have additional GSE charters issued even within this U.S. sovereign wealth fund of many of the concepts of what would go into that fund? This is an interesting concept because the U.S. kind of picked this up or took over in a bankruptcy environment and are seeing it through to health. So they've got a lot to say in what happens here. So I don't know. I some interesting concepts being thrown around. And it does seem that one way or another, the downstream effects of whatever ends up happening here will affect appraisers. I'm not sure exactly how. We have seen some suggestion that the GSEs exiting conservatorship will make them a little more progressive in some of their initiatives within the appraisal space, whether that is appraisal waivers or anything different. So we just got to be. I think it's important to stay tuned here.
Boy, absolutely, and to that end, I'm going to share our screen for just a minute. It was interesting to see Pulte out there on Twitter/X. Soliciting feedback on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I mean, he's at least asking for feedback. It's interesting because there are a lot of different directions this could go, and I don't know where it's going to go. But for anybody interested in giving some feedback, I'm sharing just the post that he had put out there for asking. All feedback is welcome. All in all caps. So for whether it's appraisers, mortgage brokers, real estate agents. Anybody interested in giving some feedback, there's at least the request for it. Now, has he decided the fate and the direction of things at this point? I don't know, but interesting to see him asking for the feedback in a public forum like this.
I saw a lot of lender suggestion and commentary, understandably. You can see there's 621 comments on here as of today. Half of them are saying, oh, great, he needs us to tell him what to do because he doesn't know. That is the interwebs, right? But I didn't see really any appraisal feedback one way or another, and I know that's maybe small potatoes to what he's doing there, but I do think it could be useful one way or another. And Jeff, maybe you and I can wrap along this topic on a future episode, talking about some things that could be better. Certainly, the concern with the expansion of appraisal waivers is out there, and a concern that I have. So, that's one of them, but there are many more.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. And a lot of the discussion is around, even in an exit of conservatorship, is there still going to be an implied or an explicitly described, backstop from the federal government, the taxpayers, the safety and soundness of a company? Everybody has a stake and an interest in if the taxpayers are on the hook to bail it out. Whereas if they're not, and the alternative is that they go under, there's maybe less concern that way. But I would worry about the lack of responsible, valuation of the assets that secure these mortgages that are being made. Technology is great. There are valuation models that can work well in many cases, but I think without the expertise of the appraisal in the process, there's an additional element of risk that that has to be accounted for. And without FHFA, saying, hey, here's how you're going to govern or manage risks, at least at some level, it would leave it more to their decision as to how they measure and quantify the risk of collateral and credit. But I think they may take bigger risks than they've been permitted under the conservatorship to this point.
You bet. Well, an active appraiser within the appraisal community, Chase Persley, had put an interesting blog post out a bit ago, just kind of downloading and analyzing the appraisal licenses from the recent data, and it was interesting to see. I think I don't remember when this was published, but some of the highest numbers of appraisers I seem to remember. The Appraisal Institute used to do something similar to this, and may still, but we might have been 100. I mean, it was over 100,000. I'm pretty sure it was in the six digits. And Chase was showing that there were like 96 roughly thousand active licenses, but about 66,000, 65,000 appraisers, individual appraisers that were holding licenses. So quite a drop from this high of 100 plus. And I think on some level is probably expected just on the efficiencies alone, that appraisers can do a little more of these appraisals than they could, before the internet or whatever else is out there. So I think you see a little bit of that. But it was curious, Jeff, and I think we've got a slide just to show here that is just showing the distribution of experience range, or how long someone has held a license. And I thought it was interesting to see that 0 to 5 years, 35%, and we can see, and Chase had talked about the low numbers from 5 to 15 years, kind of being tied to those years just after the great financial crisis in 2008. The licensures sort of follow the trends of the industry, and we had a boom during COVID, no doubt. Experience tells me that a lot of those folks that got in during the boom didn't have enough time to build a business, or a line of business, so that when things have dried up now for 2 freaking years, that, they've had trouble keeping in. And then they've got decisions on whether to keep the license and pay the money to do that while money may be tight. Once they've switched over to find income, somewhere else, do they want to come back? And is the ground fertile for that? And then you've got the 20 plus years of experience or more at 28%. So between those two, the 0 to 5 and over 20, what is that? 52%? I get 62%. And, I think a lot of people think that we're going to have quite a few less appraisers. And we have this catalyst coming up, which is 3.6, the new forms. And, it is a lot of new learning. I kind of think this may be a catalyst that we see a further drop in the number of appraisers that are out there. What do you see of this?
I think that's right. And, in a prior conversation that we had with Danny Wiley, I mean, he was kind of anticipating a similar trend, as far as, some amount fewer. It's always hard to know, to quantify how much that will be. But I can tell you anecdotally, I mean, I've talked with appraisers that are definitely in this 20 plus, category, and most, in the 30 plus years of experience as an appraiser, and saying, yeah, I'm not interested in learning a whole new way to compose these reports and deliver them to clients. I'm just planning to hang it up. And I've talked with a number of them that licenses expire this year and they are not planning to renew. And I think you make a good point too, Mark, that with those that fit in this 0 to 5 year category, I'm curious how many are actively, practicing in the moment. I would guess, a lot of them are, but I would also guess that not all of them are, because things have gone from a real boom time to a real bust time. And so, maybe they're doing it part-time, maybe they've been forced into something different, but it was interesting to hear Lyle Radke's perspective on hybrid appraisals as being one tool kind of in the tool belt, as he describes it, to address the boom times. Because the one challenge that is just a reality in the moment is, and it always has been, is that you can't quickly adjust the appraiser supply to match the demand that's out there, because it takes multiple years to become an appraiser. And so for the multiple years that it's busy and somebody says, hey, this would be a good career to get into, it takes them those multiple years to get licensed. Then they come in as things start to slow down again. And it's just an unfortunate reality that we have to deal with. So I know there are many appraisers that don't like the hybrid, appraisal, process or approach or whatever. And that's fine. I mean, you can like it or not, or whatever. It was insightful for me to hear him characterize it as one way to address this inelastic, supply of appraisers that exist out there when things, become particularly busy. They don't stay that way forever, as we've, lived in this last 5-year cycle. But Chase did a great job. It's really interesting to see this breakdown as to how much experience appraisers out there have. And I guess a little humbling to see that we're now in the highest category of years of experience in this. I maybe should take exception with him not going higher than that, to not make me feel like the oldest person out there.
Man, yeah, I did think that, Jeff. That dang, we're just the most wise now in the business, or least dumb to get out, or something. I don't know what it is, but there we are. Okay, very good. Well, yeah, I appreciate Chase for putting that work together in his contributions to the appraisal community. Another item I just wanted to touch on, you and I couldn't be further from Northeasterners, both in geography and maybe temperament, but, we don't appraise actively in that market, in that general region. But boy, is it a different territory than what we are experiencing in more sunshine states and whatnot. It seems to have almost not slowed down ever during all of this time. And we've got an article here from I think it's Fast Company, and I will get the author. Maybe Lance, I'll find that as we're talking. But it is showing a decreasing inventory today versus what, February of January of 17. We've seen a material decrease. It's incredible.
Yeah, we touched on this a little bit in some previous episodes, just the general trend of inventories increasing in the South, but not in the North, and particularly in the Northeast. And so it's been fascinating to look in places like New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, where inventories today are actually lower than they were in 2017 at this same beginning of the year. It really surprised me. And some of these are pretty dramatic drops too. It's not even just, marginally lower, but I look at some of these charts on the screen, like in Maine, and we talked about Connecticut, having a lower state inventory than, a kind of a sub-market of a Florida suburb or something. It's just really, really interesting to see the change or the different makeup in these Northeast states inventory versus about the rest of the country.
It truly is amazing. I mean, you hear a lot of stories of the tens of offers over contract and that sort of stuff. And then you zoom to the other side of the country. I saw some anecdote of somebody had offered 300,000 over contract and got beat out by someone offering 500,000 over contract. So the hot markets are generally kind of staying hot, but certainly the sunshine states and those that have taken a lot of migration during COVID are struggling right now with deeply increasing inventory. In Houston, there was a builder that I think was offering 1.99% financing, so they were buying that rate down pretty impressively. There's change out there for sure.
Yeah, there really is. And I can just tell you that on a call with some of our appraiser team members, it was interesting to hear, some of Florida appraisers describing this, modestly increasing inventory environment. And, an appraiser in Ohio describing, what you had talked about, multiple offers, contract price being bid above list price, it's still not. And what's interesting is not even in every single segment of that particular, market, kind of central Ohio. Some segments that they were having these bidding wars, other areas they weren't. So it's still, local effects to some extent, but, it's also kind of centralized between the different parts of the country as to whether the overall conditions are, softening and more options to buy, or even fewer options to buy now than there were 7 or 8 years ago.
It's interesting stuff. Yeah, Lance Lambert with Resi Club always puts out a lot of good stuff, and he was the author of this article on Fast Company. So I wanted to make sure that we referenced him there.
I thought that was right, but I didn't want to make a liar out of both of us. Yeah,
exactly. Well, also quiet news kind of on the economy and trouble that's out there, or just maybe this is like the AI update. I don't know, Jeff, but we did see Amazon reportedly planning to eliminate 14,000 managerial positions between now and second quarter of 2025. That's pretty meaningful. Sounds like kind of the white collar jobs out there. And is that AI optimization that's happening? Is that a slowdown in the economy? I don't know.
Sometimes just the scale of companies is hard to wrap your head around. I mean, 14,000 managers. I don't know what their total headcount is, but that's not eliminating all managerial positions, I'm sure, but it's a percentage reduction of the total, just in that class of worker. But it's probably a combination of those things. I would expect, Mark, where it partially economic related, but partially a drive, this drive towards efficiency. And we commented on this previously, but it was interesting to see Elon, buy Twitter, go in and slash expenses, drastically there to try to get to profitability, and then that kind of became in vogue or the thing to do, and now we're seeing similar approaches within the government. But so to see another tech company that's also doing or employing kind of a similar strategy isn't surprising on the one hand, but it also seems kind of like the logical and responsible thing to do if you've got more staff than you really need. And AI is likely a contributing factor to the amount of staff needed in some of those positions.
Amen. Yeah. I don't know. I think these are all data points to consider and sort of put together some sort of forecast on what this world looks like and where we're heading. So I think it's important to take note of that. The last topic that I had on the docket here was you and I were talking about a podcast with Hal Humphreys and Lyle Radke that was talking a little bit about the market adjustment initiative or new requirements. And I thought that was really interesting and certainly something our listeners should hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Hal does a great job. And so I would encourage anybody that's interested in this topic to go and listen to the webinar that they just recently put on. And I think it's published and you can access it through Appraiser e-learning. My takeaway, and I've given Lyle a hard time in the past, they have to make this disclaimer that, regardless of what I say, it's what's in our published selling guide that is actually the ground source truth. I would probably employ a similar disclaimer here. What I'm going to share is my interpretation of, basically of that webinar. If you're going to put your license on the line, it may be worth, listening to the webinar and reading the Fannie selling guide to make sure that you're using the best information. But the thing that really stood out to me, Mark, and I think was just worth commenting on here, was simply that, in that description, what happened in the communication that went out was, Fannie had put out a kind of a statement and then a graph showing a changing market condition in a particular market that had gone up and flattened and gone down and then gone back up, and illustrating the point that in a single appraisal report, you might have, or at least conceivably could have, market condition adjustments that were both positive and negative and zero or neutral. And the thing that I understood Lyle to have said that made a lot of sense to me was that communication was really intended for the users of appraisals, for underwriters and lenders to understand that Fannie expects to see these adjustments made and that they may not be all just on a straight line basis, and that's okay. He said, I can't remember exactly his exact phrasing, but he said something to the effect that communication didn't go out ideally, and it's been a real pain in his backside dealing with appraisers saying, well, how am I supposed to replicate this? And I don't have the data in every market to produce this analysis as well. So it was just insightful. I think, I was hearing the appraisers like, relax, you need to be analyzing the market and citing your sources and having, some support for what you're doing. It doesn't have to be this exact way of doing it, but that communication was really intended for users of appraisals to understand what the heck is going on as appraisers are describing markets that may be in a state of fluctuation, up, down, and in between.
Yeah, I misinterpreted that too, and I think we had Jim Amarin on, who had just come from a GSE webinar and asked specifically what was required, and was telling us that it's not that graph that's there is what's required. So good. I think it's good for appraisers to hear that over and over, especially those that may not be as connected and up on this kind of stuff. And most appraisers, if they're lucky, they would have gotten that selling guide update, but certainly wouldn't have been hearing any of the after talk that's going on to clarify. So I think it's good to at least espouse or echo that as much as we can so that people hear it well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the webinar was well done. So I definitely encourage people to check that out if they have questions or just want additional context and perspective around what is actually intended. It was interesting. One of the stated options for reporting the market conditions for the appraisers is a home price index, among other things. And, Lyle made the point that it was they listed a number of different ways to go about that. And it's not doing all of those things, but doing one that, best fits and represents your market was was insightful. So yeah, definitely check it out.
You bet. Well, Jeff, time to get out of here. We got work to do. Look forward to the next episode.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it, Mark. We'll be back again.
All right.